webcast, Improved Detection Outcomes with Threat Intelligence. My name is Kevin Landt. I'm a product manager here at EiQ Networks. Just a note, all of the attendees are in listen-only mode. If you do have questions, there is a question and answer box in the GoToWebinar user interface where you can ask questions if you want, or if you'd rather, we'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards to answer any questions that you have. So today we'll start by trying to define a couple of the biggest buzzwords in cybersecurity right now, like threat intelligence and indicators of compromise. And we'll identify a few of the drivers behind the adoption of threat intelligence. Then we'll dig into how people are actually using threat intelligence for detection, response, and prevention. We'll go over a few of the best practices if you're thinking about diving into threat intelligence. And then we'll wrap up with a look at EiQ Security Monitoring Service, talk a little bit about how we are implementing threat intelligence. So let's start by defining threat intelligence. I picked Gartner's definition. There's a few other definitions out there. I'm not saying that this is the right one, but it seems like a good one to start the conversation to talk about. And their definition is evidence-based knowledge, including context, mechanisms, indicators, implications, and actionable advice about an existing or emerging menace or hazard, to assets that can be used to inform decisions regarding the subject's response to that menace or hazard. And so, when we typically think about data feeds when someone mentions threat intelligence, but that's really only one part of it, and that's why I like this definition. To really get at the intelligence part of it, you need to be able to answer a few questions, like who is targeting us, how are they targeting us, and what are they after? And you really need this context to fully evaluate a security incident when it occurs. Your IT security staff also needs to understand your own company's business operations, personnel, and infrastructure in order to understand the opportunity that's being presented to the attacker. And that helps you figure out what the attacker's intents are. What are they after? So once you know the attacker's methods and intents, then you can start to shape policies and security tools and methodologies and help figure out how to allot your own time in the best areas. Another term that goes along with it is indicator of compromise, or IOC. An indicator of compromise is an artifact that's observed in a system or a network that indicates a breach has occurred. And it indicates with some amount of confidence that a breach has occurred. So the better the source of your IOC, the more confidence you have that a breach has really occurred. But that's what we're after here. And it's important to note that these are really just single data points. So you've got things like IP addresses, domain names, URLs, file hashes, virus signatures. These are all examples of IOCs. And really, again, a single data point, and unless you kind of connect the dots, you're not really getting true intelligence out of them. So you really need to understand, what is this IP address being used for? Is it a command and control server? Why is it that the URL was blacklisted? Without knowing those kind of things, you've got some information, but you don't really have much in the way of intelligence yet. So where do these IOCs come from? There's a number of different sources where we get our information. They range from sort of passive to more active. One of the big ones is network monitoring, and that could mean you monitoring your own network. When you analyze an incident, you determine what the IOCs are that are part of that incident, and then you can record those and store those for future use. It might also be somebody else's network monitoring that someone else is monitoring their network and they decide to share what they find, or they decide to sell that information. That's a big source of where we get our indicators of compromise. Another one is things like honeypots and spam traps. This is sort of a passive way of collecting data on attackers. We put out a target out there, we let people attack it, and we keep track of what they're doing and who's doing it, and record all that information. Then we start to get into some of the more active ones, so proactively going out and crawling websites, looking for malicious code, collecting malware samples and trying to reverse engineer them, trying to fingerprint them so we know and we can identify similar malware when it comes up again. And then you get into the real investigative work. So we're not just looking at the attacks themselves, we're looking at the attackers. We're monitoring their activity on social networks. We're tracking them in the dark web and on Tor. And then all the way down to sort of the far end is the old-fashioned investigation where we're actively engaging them, trying to infiltrate their networks and learn about what makes them tick. So what's driving the adoption of threat intel? Well, it's really a response to some of the other key trends that are going on in cybersecurity right now. So the traditional approach has always been to put up a perimeter around your network, keep the gates locked as much as possible, and keep everything within that perimeter. That model is no longer effective, and there's a couple reasons why. One, business and the way we do business has changed. There are a lot of other trends going on in computing in general that have made some of the perimeter-based models obsolete. Things like cloud computing, things like bring your own device, the huge number of mobile workers that we have today. It's just not as feasible to try to build a fence around all of those assets and keep them contained. So we're opening more doorways so people can do work in different ways, but in doing that, we're also opening up more vulnerabilities. There's also been a big change in attack methods and sophistication. So now malware has really been commercialized. If you want to go out and buy a pre-built exploit, you can do that today. You can go out and rent a botnet if you want to launch a DDoS attack or blast some spam out. There's botnets for rent. And a lot of these new exploits have been designed to evade the old traditional signature-based technologies that we had out there. So what's driving threat intelligence is, with all these changes, we're really changing our priority from prevention to detection and response. So the faster we detect something, the faster we respond to it, the less damage there is. And we've kind of accepted that we can't keep everyone out. There's going to be breaches, but the faster we detect them and respond to them, the better we're able to withstand a breach. And that's where threat intelligence comes in. So we're going to talk about 3 different use cases for threat intelligence. The first one is around detection. And typically how we do this is we take a lot of our data that's out there in our firewalls and our gateways and proxies and our network infrastructure, and we feed that into a SIEM platform. And at the same time, we're feeding in threat feeds, and we're doing some correlation and analysis, and we're trying to detect incidents that might not have stood out on their own, but when combined with threat intelligence, they come to the forefront. And the types of things we're looking for are inbound traffic. We want to look for people doing recon scans, people launching attacks from the outside. We also want to look at outbound connections. That's going to help us detect if any of our systems have been owned and they're calling out, if any of our desktops or laptops have become part of a botnet, we'll detect that outbound traffic, any kind of malware that calls home. And we'll also detect anybody sending data outside of our network. Of course, you also want to look at your web logs and see who's maybe connecting to some websites that are known to be malicious. So these are some of the ways that we're using threat intelligence for detection. Another key use case for threat intelligence is not to detect something, but to add it on to one of our other devices that has already kicked off an alert, which has already detected something. And we can use that to triage. And what we're really going to see is this comes in very useful for our security tools that are notorious for kicking off a lot of false alarms. So it's going to be things like IDS, any of our security analytics platforms, and our SIM. So these are really good tools for detecting more advanced threats, but they do have a high false positive rate typically. They do take a lot of tuning, and so we can use threat intelligence to triage our alerts, understand which of our alerts we should be addressing first. We can escalate those. We can investigate those using threat intelligence. And some examples, these are some of the types of events that you might want to triage using threat intelligence. So IDS, IPS events, account lockouts, database activity, anytime something's created or deleted, configuration changes, activity on some of the suspicious ports, and maybe some early signs of a DDoS attack. So again, we're looking at the types of events that are noisy by nature. You're going to have all kinds of account lockouts all day and night. Most of them are harmless, but every once in a while you get one that's a sign of a breach. And so these are the type of things that if your team was trying to chase down each and every one of these events, you would spend all of your time spinning your wheels. But if we can use threat intelligence to triage these events, then you become a much more effective response team. And then the third use case I wanted to talk about was prevention and tuning. So once we've used our threat intelligence for detection and for triage and response, we want to try to feed some of that learning back into our tools to prevent these incidents from happening the next time. So we want to update our IPS signatures. We want to update our policies and our firewall rules so that we can block these earlier in the process the next time. We also want to use these things for tuning. So IDS and SIM rules, they need constant tuning. It's an ongoing learning process that sort of never ends. So using threat intelligence can speed up that feedback loop and make sure we're getting the right things back into our alert rules to reduce the false positives from happening. So a recent SANS survey took a look at how people are using threat intelligence. Not surprisingly, what we see near the top are firewalls, IPS, vulnerability management, and SIM. And at the time of this survey, more of the effort was going into detection rather than response. But again, those are both use cases that you want to think about with threat intelligence. So some best practices if you do want to use threat intelligence. And I would say number one, make sure you're doing all the basics first. If you're not collecting and monitoring event logs, if you're not actively scanning for vulnerabilities, if you're not patching and hardening your systems, you should really be doing those things first before you try to incorporate threat intelligence into your security program. You're really not going to get a lot out of threat until you're doing some of these basic things first. If you are ready to jump into threat intel, the first thing you should do is identify the use cases. So how do you plan on using threat intelligence? Because that's going to drive a lot of the other decisions that you make as you roll it out. Once you know how you're going to use threat intelligence, you need to know what else do you need to collect. So as we mentioned, threat intelligence on its own, those data feeds that we think about aren't useful unless you put them in the right context. So what else do you need to collect, and do you have the right tools for doing that? Leverage your internal resources. Don't run out and hire a bunch of third-party vendors without thinking about what you have in-house, what kind of knowledge you have of your own organization. A lot of this data might already be sitting inside your network, and you just need to get at it. So think about what you can do internally before you go to your outside sources, and then use those outside sources to fill the gaps. So that might be threat data from a public source, somebody like US CERT, or some of the open source feeds that are available. Threat intelligence vendors, where you can buy their data, might be a little higher quality, or it might be more specialized, depending on who the vendor is. And then personnel. If you don't have enough staff internally to be able to analyze the data, to be able to triage alerts when they go off, think about using an outside resource to fill your personnel gaps. And then just in summary, a little bit more about threat intelligence and the intelligence part of it. Again, I just want to emphasize data feeds do not equal threat intelligence. If there's human analysis involved, you really do need humans involved in processing this data. And you really need to know your organization. You need to understand your business processes, understand your assets, what services are running within your network. That'll help you make full use of the threat data that you have. And with that, I'd like to just talk a little bit more about EiQ and our SOCVue hybrid security as a service offering. So SOCVue provides technologies for security monitoring and vulnerability management combined with our security operations staff, so that you're getting both the technology and the people to help you make the best use of it. And today I'm going to mostly focus on security monitoring because we're talking about threat intelligence here. With our security monitoring service, you get 24/7 security monitoring by our security analysts. You get incident notification and remediation guidance. Our team will help you implement best practices for audit log maintenance and analysis. We'll help you with compliance reporting because that's a big piece of the security monitoring requirements. We deliver daily and monthly security reports, including our performance scorecards, which help you show your performance over time and is summarized in an executive format that you can present to senior management or to your board of directors. And you get access to our team, so you get one-on-one security consultation with your security delivery manager on a regular basis. And we are excited to announce that we are now integrating threat feeds and threat intelligence into the service itself. So you now get even more value. We can help you implement best practices for analyzing your logs and monitoring for things using threat intelligence. We can detect faster and help you triage faster. We give you more context for analyzing incidents. And we provide forensic search capabilities, so you can see where did that IP address come up before in the past in my log, things you want to search for while you're investigating an incident. And then our team's going to use all that data to help baseline your alerts and help tune your alerts over time so that you're getting the best value out of our security monitoring. This is all delivered through our SOCVue web portal, and you'll see whenever threat intelligence matches up with something we found in your alerts, you'll get a threat indicator. So you can come in and figure out which alerts need your attention first and triage your events. And like all our alerts, you can drill down to get more detail on the event itself, drill into the details and investigate. And whenever we see an indicator of compromise, we're going to flag that for you to make it really obvious. I can't show too much today in this format. What a much better format is for you to request a demo. Meet with one of our solutions engineers. It's really easy, really painless. I invite you to go to our website, www.eiqnetworks.com, and fill out the request demo form, and they'll set up a call with you. And that's our presentation for today. Thank you for joining us. If you do have any questions, you can add them in the question box. We appreciate your time, and thank you for attending.